Hey guys, it's your course director Emily Ray here. Just wanted to give you a little bit of positive, productive feedback on these visual resumes that you submitted. I'm very pleased overall with what you guys have done as a group. I want to just point out a few things in this review over all of the resumes that were submitted to give you some points to consider for how to evolve this into its next best iteration. Keeping in mind, you guys, that your resume is somewhat of a living, breathing document in that you're always gaining more experience, maybe even more education and skills. And anytime that you're going to be applying for a job, this resume needs to be in a format that is easily customizable for the job description that you are actually applying for. So I want to start here with Steph's resume. It's very clean. It's got a strong visual impact up here with the header. We've got your branding information and then just kind of a short synopsis of what you do and your experience and creative skills. So overall, the layout is very effective, but there are some things to think about here. One being the image that you've chosen here. Is this you? And if it is, it's not as professional of an image, but if it is an example of the photography that you do, that's another thing. So it's a great image nonetheless, but wondering if something here like you a picture of you taking pictures would be more effective to kind of communicate, your skills in these creative disciplines. Looking at these icons here, there's something I want you to consider that as a paper document, if you were to print this out, we can't click on these to take us anywhere. And as an electronic document, they can be linked to these various places. A more effective way to show your connections or what platforms you're available on would be similar to what Jamal has done here. See, he has the icons, but then he also has the URLs. And so that way people will know what platform you're on. And even if I printed this out, I could type out this URL and find you. As is right now, all this really tells me, if I were to print it out or if these aren't linked, is that I can find you at these locations. So something for you to think about just to make this design a bit more usable. Another thing is I kind of find it interesting that the icons are sort of bleeding over or overlapping into this white space just a little bit. My recommendation would be to push those up because where they are right now, it doesn't look intentional. With the lettering on your name, because it drops down so deeply, it makes sense to me, but here, not so much. The other thing too is I'd encourage you to put a little more space between designer, photographer, writer. Maybe make that a bit more bold to stand out from this text here because it's somewhat of a subheading or a title or a description. And you want that to stand out more so than this text here, just for the information hierarchy on the page. Because you have a lot of good spacing within these elements here on the outside. I would align this contact information in the vertical center here, meaning I don't push it all the way up to the top of this blue area. I would more equally distribute the spacing in here, and then I would add more spacing in between these elements so it filled this space in this area. Overall, it's a really effective design, and this is something I want you guys to be thinking about sort of in terms of the content and how you want to position yourself in the industry, but making sure that there's a clear connection between the skills and experiences that you've listed here and the types of jobs that you want to get in the media communications industry. And aside from, so here you don't really talk about your experiences, I'm sorry, not experiences, but responsibilities or the tasks within these roles or what you were able to accomplish in these roles. I want you to think also about, what was your signature impact? What was unique about the way you approach that, and see if you can characterize it and put it in there. Let's see, moving forward, those are my main ideas and points of feedback for you, Steph. Just a few small tweaks could really help this get into its next best place. We're going to jump over to Amy next. So here we have another awesome visual version of your resume. Stylistically, it seems that you're being pretty consistent with your branding, but a few notes, right? So we've got your name here in the line break, but then that gives us a whole bunch of empty space up here. Imagine if your name fit onto one line, you could move this bar and this section up some more so it doesn't feel quite so cramped or crowded. The other thing too is if you were to maybe make this information down here fit onto two lines or maybe one line, you'd have more area down here in the footer. What I'll say is that this decorative text is cool for your name or for a brand, but it's not as readable of a text. And so maybe for these headings and the subheadings, you want to choose something that's a bit more scannable and easy to read. Looking at this visual version, this text is a little bit different. You might want to revisit that just to ensure some consistency there. What I'm seeing here, what's standing out to me in this purple text is this date range, right? And what is more important is freelance photography, video, and content creator. And so what I'd like to see more is the focus, maybe make this title or this entity a bit more bold so as to stand out and to draw my eye in that area. Down here, again, I'm feeling like this part is a bit cramped, whereas we've got so much empty space over here. Just a reshuffling of these elements, I think, would help give you a better balance on the page. More attention needs to be spent here talking about your roles, responsibilities, how you approach this project, what your signature impact was. And then last but not least, like stylistically, you have this text up here with no additional enhancements or formatting, meaning that there's no stroke, there's no drop shadow, there's nothing like that. But then we have this element over here that's heavily stylized, both with an opacity change, with an outline, with a drop shadow, and to me that is too big of a contrast stylistically. If you're applying all of these effects in this area that we don't see anywhere else, my recommendation would be to lose sort of these extra flares as it's inconsistent with the rest of the branding on what we see here. So again, big opportunities moving forward on this resume would be to refloat the content so that you have more of a balanced layout, be using up sort of these empty spaces just to give your content a little bit more room to breathe, specifically in this area here and then up in this place. But overall, a nice approach, few tweaks will get this into a great place for heading into your next portfolio class. Next up, we've got savannas here. So we see something very similar in sort of the layout and the design with the dots and sort of like the overlapping elements here. But in this case, because we don't have the drop shadow or the outline, it is a bit more in alignment with what the overall brand of this page is. This is very well laid out. It's well balanced. This part down here looks a little bit off-brand just because we're bringing in totally different topography, two styles that have the sort of decorative quality to it, and it's a far different aesthetic than what we see up here with this serif text, and it's very sort of formalized, and this is very informal. What I'll say is that this light blue, it's not offering enough color contrast against the white. It's somewhat grating on the eyes, the contrast here. My recommendation would be to change the color here just to something a bit deeper, a little bit less neon, if you will, so that it contrasts more easily against the white page here. Again, opportunities moving forward. Give us a little bit more information about what what your job, the details are here. Just so we can fully understand how your employment or your experience lends itself to media communications. Overall, this is very well done. I might like to see a little bit more padding up here at the top, more margin. This is bumping up pretty close there. But yeah, I mean, I think that if you I think that if you revisit the inclusion of this information, you can pull this down in a meaningful way and just have a cleaner overall, better laid out design. But again, I want you to be thinking you have some of your accomplishments here, but beyond sort of what you did in high school, what were your accomplishments like in your job? Like what was the again, the signature impact or the way that you approached this that nobody else could? Something to think about moving forward. All right, next up we have Carlin. So just an absolute plethora of information that we see here. Everything is very well laid out on this page. You're doing a good job of observing, margins, but I will say this is feeling very crowded, as is this. You have a long work history, so you have a lot of things to pull from, but my recommendation for you would be to think about how you want to articulate this in a streamlined way. Your icons up here are a little bit inconsistent in terms of the size. It seems as if they are also not linked to anything. Now, we had a discussion about that at the beginning of the review to talk about a more effective way to showcase your icons, which would be similar to what Jarmal did over here, because listing the URL as well means that if someone were to print out this resume, they could still locate you with that link. As is right now, this is just an indication that you are present on those platforms, and I would still have to go and find you there. Um, I believe that these headings would be more effective since you have everything else pretty much left aligned in this area. I'd go ahead and left align those two, and if you can, visually make them a bit bigger in terms of the font size, just so they stand out a bit more. You're already using bold, which is helpful, but I'd like to see just a little bit more style in that to help facilitate the information hierarchy, that visual hierarchy on the page. Your logo here, my recommendation is to make it a little bit smaller so that it's not butting up against this blue container that it's in. And I'm looking at what's the available space on this resume. Well, because you're using this container, it forces you to not use this space up here. These icons could be moved down into this area. Your contact information, instead of stacking it in this way, could be either put down here in the footer or on a single line, which would give you a bit more space to play with in this area, because again, you do have so much great content, but it is looking a bit crowded in this space. Overall, this is effective as is, but with a few tweaks, it could be a stronger visual design. All right, next up we've got the resume of Chris Houston. So it's very basic and not too much in terms of the visuals here. The opportunities, one would be to apply a bit more of your personal branding, but then secondly, just really sort of tease out and develop this content a bit more. So we can see that this is your experience, your work experience, and your education here, but like we have no you say professional profile here. This should say, work experience or employment. Down here it should say education. So we need to have these headings in place and then more fully detailed. Think about the keyword-rich content that needs to be here to allow potential employers to see the full scope of your skill set and potentially what you could do for them in their organization. One thing I want you to be thinking about is how does my experience translate into media communications industry? So here you're doing customer service. Here you're being a content creator. Here you're working at GameStop. I would wager that in all of these roles there is some sort of media element, even if it's not obvious. So I want you to be thinking about what is it that I do every day that I can translate in a meaningful way to a resume to get me a job in the media communications industry. And again, don't just focus on what your roles and responsibilities are, but what is your unique contribution and how do you make an impact in that role? This needs to be just more stylized and more structural elements and really beef out the content that you have here. All right, next up we've got Michael. So strong visual design, strong impact for sure. But we're not really seeing much in terms of content here on the page. Little curious about this stylistic element. Everything looks pretty sort of grid organized, and then we've got this line here. Don't really know how to interpret that given that we have these two spaces here. It might make more sense had there been content in these areas. A couple of things to think about. One, the center alignment of what we see is not a best practice for user experience with reading content. So we read from left to right, and anytime our eyes are wrapping around, it's easier for us if there's a consistent starting point on that next line, and center alignment also tends to get a bit more of a jagged look, so not quite as clean in terms of alignment. I'd like to see you, like the rose color is great, and there's a decent amount of contrast between these elements. But you see how this white is really standing out. I'd like to maybe see you use the white for the content portions here. You can keep those headings, the rose color, just to kind of give them a visual distinction and have them stand out. So again, left aligning the content on these areas more fully, detailing this experience. This is just sort of like a bulleted list, but what can you tell me about what you've done in each of these things that would make me think, oh, well, Michael's the guy that I need to hire for this particular job? Last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about this sort of visual interpretation of your skills. When you put things together like this, but don't really define the ends of this spectrum or define what these dots mean, the only real conclusion that I can draw is your relative knowledge and skills and abilities for each one of these skills as you place it up against another, right? So I know that you know photography and videography least compared to all of these other things, and that's kind of counterintuitive for me since you do photography, right? And so because you even have the camera icon here, so you're saying I'm a photographer or I do photo, digital, related media, but then go ahead and putting like photography and videography as your least impressive skill here. So that's something you want to revisit because again, looking at these dots, they don't really tell me anything other than Microsoft Office the best, right? And then Premiere Pro the best. And so again, you're not defining the ends of these spectrums. Does 0 dots mean I have absolutely no idea what these disciplines or software programs are? And then maybe 4 dots is I have, proficiency, I have mastery, I am an expert. You haven't defined that. So all I can draw again is the idea that videography and photography least. And I'm sure that's not exactly what you want me to pull away from this. So again, the biggest opportunities for you, Michael, are to expand upon the content, align it in a different way, reevaluate how you want to present your skills, and then just give me some more information about your roles, responsibilities, your unique contribution in these areas. Again, guys, you want this information on your resume to be clearly, to see the connection between, these are my skills and experiences, and this is the type of job that I am qualified for. And so to the extent that you can articulate that and make that clear, the more effective your resume is going to be to get you a job in media communications. All right, next up we've got Natalie, and so this design is effective in sort of sectioning out, the various content. You use a few. This is a decorative font, and this is a decorative font up here. My recommendation is you use something that's a bit more readable for just like the general content. So this would be okay for headings and subheadings, but use something that has a bit less flair and that's a little bit easier to read in this area. Everything else is left aligned mostly on this page, so I think that your name and your contact details should also be left aligned. Think about also like your logo is really kind of butting up the edges of this purple container here, and also in this area. How can you make this information float a little bit more evenly to give it breathing room inside this element? I would left align these headings here so that it would match. Another thing is you could give yourself 2 extra lines of space if you were to not have the dates floating up here on the top. It seems like you're really cramming in this information over here. You have a lot of technical skills, which is great. And then also maybe can you make this so that it goes onto a single line, and that will give you a bit more room to play. Sort of an overall piece of feedback, with these resumes is, I'm asking you to do it visually. I'm asking you to keep it to 1 page, but that doesn't mean that your experience shouldn't be more detailed in what you did. Like if I'm looking at this area, there's so much available space in this content section for you to be able to at least give us a better idea of what you did in each one of these roles. So certainly that is an opportunity for you to more fully contextualize and express your skill set and how that will translate for a potential employer in another role. All right, next up we have Alex's. Very clean. A couple of things jump out at me. One, that there's not enough contrast between the black text and this blue. It's a very pretty color. Go ahead and put white text in here and left align this information instead of center align it. It will make it easier to scan and read. You have plenty of room to spread this out so that this phone number doesn't have to wrap. So potentially it is, logo and then contact detail, logo and then contact detail. Over here, again, we need to talk about making sure that your content is left aligned for easier readability. And just overall, it's very clean. You have a lot of professional experience. You do a nice job of really detailing what it means to work in these positions. So, you guys, as I have been reviewing these resumes, this would be a good example to follow, right? So he gives, what he did, but then also talks about what does it take to be in that role and what was his, there's so much great keyword rich content in here, like news and production and camera and directing and all of these things that a potential employer could look at and say, oh, Alex has the experience that's needed to be successful in this role. So that's what I want you guys to be thinking about, as you are, beefing up your work experience and your employment history. Again, left align, color contrast, left align, refloat these. This is a little dangling element here. You've got closed boxes everywhere else, but not a closed box here. Just some, minor tweaks, and this is going to be in an awesome place. Alex, nice job. And then last but not least, we've got Jamal. And so like this is a very, this one is really taking advantage of all of the the opportunities to make something more visual, to be fully descriptive in your roles and in your responsibilities, to talk not just about your skills and how you can be contacted and other places that you can connect with, Jamal on social media. You also do a really good job of leveraging color in a sparse but effective way. My eye is immediately drawn to creative director, director of communications, and photographer, and then I can go in and fully read, what you were able to accomplish in these roles. So overall, Jamal, super effective in the design, and I appreciate all of the thought, that you put into this. Into this really well done resume. Kind of moving forward, of course, that having different variations of this resume will be important. To the extent that you could do a one-page version of this would be just handy to have on hand. But actually another question here is, why is this full cell logo the only logo or visual element? Something for you to kind of consider, what is the purpose or the meaning and the only logo that I put there on that page. And then stylistically, just looking at these bullets down here, I did want to note in these areas where the bullets are wrapping to the next line, you want to make sure that there's an indentation here where the second line is aligning more with the A and less with the bullet. It's just a stylistic thing that will help the content look a bit more clean. Overall, super impressed with what you guys have done. A few tweaks, and these resumes are going to be at a really great place heading into the final months of the media communications program. And you're going to be spending a lot of time in Portfolio 7, doing career development activities to help you guys get from where you are right now to where you want to be in media communications. If you have any questions about the feedback provided here, please let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to continuing to work with you guys.